So I don't really have a formal introduction for Werner Berger because he is so special to me. Werner Berger, actually, when I met him, he had already been the world record holder for the oldest living person to climb all 7 summits. That to me is absolutely amazing. And he had such resilience and such laughter in his life when I met him. It's been, gosh, probably 4 or 5 years ago. And what the first thing I remember about Werner is he challenged me to climb a summit with him. Now, my first thought was, oh my gosh, I've never even, hardly hiked a long way. How could I climb a summit? But the second thought was, Werner believes in me. He sees something in me that I could climb something, do something that I never thought was possible. And that's what Werner does in his life and also with his clients. So he has an amazing business besides just traveling the world. And he's got a lovely, lovely wife, and they share so many experiences together all around the world. But he also helps so many people see their potential. So I would like to turn this over to Werner. Werner Berger, my friend, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Judy and Jenny. What a pleasure. And especially with this topic of spirit, because from where I sit, there are really 2 needs for our spirits to evolve fully. And you guys are definitely catalysts to supporting people in doing that. And one of them, of course, has to do with physical comfort. We've got to get to a point in our lives where we're not scratching for food or for clothing or for accommodation. Once that has been satisfied, we have to switch gears. And actually, preferably, we would have already switched some gears a little bit before that, because the next comfort is an internal one. It's comfort with self. And when we approach both of those, that's when our spirit really, really soars. The unfortunate part, though, is from my experience as a corporate leadership consultant and coaching tons of people on with amazing programs where they walk away saying, wow, this is going to be a life changer for me. And it could be communication skills, it could be team building skills, it could be parenting skills, it could be leadership skills, it doesn't matter. Most of the time, people do not implement what they learned because they can't. And the reason they can't is they stuck with their beliefs of not being good enough. And in fact, there are a whole bunch of beliefs that commonly hold us back. Mine used to be, for the longest time, I'm not good enough. And it didn't matter whether I climbed Mount Everest or the 7 summits, or I ran a in 7 years, or that I ended up being a corporate leadership consultant. As long as the not good enough is there, although the physical needs might have been fulfilled, the internal needs were not. Some of the other misbeliefs, unfortunately, are simply that I'm not worthy, I don't belong, I'm not significant, I'm not perfect, I'm not capable, or somebody's more capable. Have these beliefs. You and I are stuck. We are changed to our perceptions of ourselves and how life could be or should be. But of course, if it's that our life could be, but we don't have the wherewithal to modify it, then of course we remain stuck. So that of course talks about the fact that what we have to modify is nothing outside of us, but within us, we have to change our beliefs. Because for progress, we need to awaken. And it's my perception that this planet needs to be awakened. Because until it is awakened, all we're going to end up that don't lead to other awaken to the point where when we make a decision that we're going to be some way or we're going to do something, that we in fact can follow through. That is in our heads. It actually translates into actions. What I've learned, and part of this came from becoming self-aware on the mountains, is that we all have a current reality. And we don't tend to define this current reality in its truest form. We don't accept, that we have some real strengths that are unique to us and not shared with anybody else. But as long as we don't accept that, we also cannot create a desired reality. And then there's this big gap between these that we work at closing, but we attempt to close it from our personal perception of who we are. In other words, our current identity. And our current identity does not allow us to live into the future identity that we need to fulfill on our commitments or our promises. And that, of course, immediately takes us into the whole area of neuroscience, of cognitive restructuring, of brain chemistry, of brain rewiring. Ultimately, none of us is perfect, except that we have been learned to not play full out in terms of who we are. We play to what we think others need, because that's the mask that we've adopted. So given the little bit of time that I have, I'm going to run through very quickly 7 things on them all, everyone at the same time. You might work on one. And when you take it through what is called the hero's journey to its end conclusion, you will now have linked with who you really are. And when you link with that, and you have comfort with that, and you get to the point of myself, or I really love my life, even when things don't go perfectly on the external, I truly love my life. That's the takeoff point to a future that we cannot even truly imagine at this point. So point 1, and you might want to make some notes here. Point 1 is attitude. You and I need to be open to shifting our current reality in terms of attitude. Need to move from not knowing who we are to being open to learn who we are, to being appreciative of who we are, to be humble when it's appropriate to be humble, to pause and to really reflect and take time for this. The next one is really stepping in you really want. And most of us know that we need to do this, but we don't take the time because we don't believe that we will really get that. But when you take the time with yourself and you really contemplate and you make this a commitment that you're going to know what your unique talents really lead you to and why you want it and what you have to give up, that's a hero's journey. That is not an easy path. Or condition yourself to do this, but just looking at little steps at a time. And the first thing you can ask yourself is, what are 3 things that I could do today that will lead me onto the path that I really want to be on? And then just fulfilling on them, not just forgetting on them. Another path, of course, is journaling. We know people who have journaled about their lives, who've journaled about the trauma in their background that has conditioned them to put this mask on. We know people who have started monitoring what is the internal conversation that I'm having that is not appropriate for today's old, when I really didn't have any power, but it's no longer appropriate. So we need to challenge that. And that's part of the hero's journey. We need to repeat and repeat and repeat. And I'm not saying, what's this expression? I just forgot it. Fake it until you make it. I'm not saying that. That doesn't work for most people. Feel it until you make it does work. Another possibility is yoga and meditation and creating an environmental change where you really start feeling who you are. And in your yoga, it's not about fitness. It's about We know that the North American inhabitants, actually the original inhabitants, used sweat lodges. We also know of breath work. We know of rebirthing. We know of past life regression. We know of drumming. We know of chanting. All of that can be a path if we persist long enough. Another possibility, of course, is therapy. But it's got to be the right kind of therapy with the right kind of therapist, because ultimately we have to resolve past trauma. And part of that could be cognitive restructuring. And that's, of course, another form of therapy. Primal therapy, which evolved in the 1970s, is a great path of getting into those feelings that have got us stuck. For me, my path was physical exertion. Being in nature, climbing mountains, getting stressed to the point where I could hardly. And I had no idea or intention of it getting me anywhere other than to the top. And at some points, in some situations, because of weather, I had to back off, but I could still go back in my feelings and I've ever had, which taught me the journey really is about just getting to the present, hour after hour, day after day, and also being because ultimately it is your life and we need you to be a whole, complete person, because until, this is my perception, people to really do that, we're going to end up and continue with a world in strife where our spirits are dampened as opposed to be released for the contribution that we can make. Judy and Judy, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk
Werner,
to you.
You touched, at least I can talk about, touched our souls and our hearts. And thank you, my dear friend, for nudging to understand it's all about the journey and being in this moment. At this moment, we are in gratitude for your presence and your wisdom and your sharing your journey with us. Judy and I and the rest of us, each one of us who's part of this today's event or otherwise in this community, really want to thank you. We can open it up for the audience, for participants. Any questions? We have 5 minutes to ask any questions from Werner. His information is there. Please do get in touch with him for your personal contact. But go ahead. Anybody has any questions?
So Werner, this is Carol. How are you? Nice to see you again.
What a pleasure seeing you.
So what's the story behind the story? How did you get into the climbing environment? How did you do that? What possessed you to go that direction?
Totally by accident. In fact, who is an adventurer, said to me, Dad, you've always thought of climbing and you've always been enamored by Everest. Why don't we trek to base camp? And this was in 1992, and I was 55 years old. So we trekked to base camp. It was an unbelievable experience. And for months afterwards, I knew something had shifted within me, because every time I thought of it, I looked at a picture or talked about it, there was this internal glow. But I still didn't understand any of it. And the other thing that I knew, and I mentioned it very briefly, as a corporate consultant, I knew that people were not integrating what they said would be life-changing experiences. And when I put the two together, I realized until I know who I am, I can't do most of this. Or until I go on my hero's journey, parts in my life, and come out the other side, not having a clue what it would be like, and not having any anticipation of what it would be like, things will be different. That's how it started. And I never thought that I'd do the 7 summits, never thought I'd climb Everest.
That's
Until
awesome.
Today came.
That's awesome. And James Fan, also he's from CEO Space. I don't know if you know him yet, Werner.
I know James well.
Okay. So he's asking, what was your greatest challenge in life?
Oh, absolutely finding myself, getting a sense of who this guy is. And, you know, it can be very superficial in terms of just simply appreciating our amazing bodies. You know, who can think of a construction as amazing as our bodies are in terms of food intake, in terms of digestion, in terms of utilization of that, in terms of excreting, and everything working in harmony. And there's not just one thing. We're looking at every single organ, every single cell has to play its part. Oh, I can go off on this one.
Oh my goodness. Werner, you know,
And Judy, I know you guys are doing a wonderful job in helping people become healthy, because that's one of the core issues of comfort. It's that external, internal comfort.
That's so true that you're singing to the choir here, Werner. So we do have one more question real quickly. How do you follow in terms of personal development? I'm not sure I understand that question. Michael, can you unmute?
While Michael is unmuting, Michael, are you ready to ask your questions? Go ahead, sir.
All right. You know, 85% of what we read here is so negative. Who do you follow in terms of personal development that kind of got you going, that you wanted to climb? As an example, I mean, like Bob Proctor, Tony Robbins, the list goes on and on. So who is your go-to person that you've enjoyed studying?
There really are quite a number of people. My first, what I would call guru that really cares is Robert Allen. Now, there's some limitations with Robert in terms of how deep he took me. But again, just a brilliant person in terms of coaching, supporting you to become successful. The next person that I ended up following was David Baer. And then finally, I got in contact with Christopher Duncan. And he has this book, You're Not Broken. In terms of, if the moment we can accept that we are not broken, we are perfect, now we can start evolving. Now we can start looking at what's keeping us stuck. And out of that, come to the conclusion that who we are, our present identity, is not the identity that we need for the future. That it's an identity shift, that it's a reclaiming of our identity. And I love this little character up here because it just oozes from her. And of course, we also know that if you put yourself into this stance several times a day and really own you, there's a chance for shifting toward where you want to be. So it really is a restructuring and a reconditioning of the brain, because our brains have been influenced to the point where they have locked into certain traumas. And every time a black dog walks by, I could be in terror. It has nothing to do with the dog. It has only to do with my internal perception and my internal construct. So those were some influencers.
Thank you, Werner. That's priceless information. That's so true. Breaking away from our past is so important. And Guinea just put a notice that the plant needs to be awakened. We are grateful for our community and helping in that process. And we feel that part of that is unleashing your free spirit.
Really,
So
really important. I mean, yes. Each and every word you said was music of life. And I was dancing along.
Thank you.
Really, honestly, Werner, it's a pleasure and honor. I think every one of us are in debt for you to awaken us for the moment, at least learning to be, doing our best and starting our conversation within ourselves. Thank you. Thank you, my dear friend. Please, each one of you reach out to him. His information is in the chat. Werner, would you be kind enough, or we can put your information there so people can connect with you. You are a friend. We need people like you to help us really step into who we are and who we want to be. And it's an honor and pleasure to share your wisdom with our community here.
Thank you.
It's totally my pleasure. And in fact, if I want the planet to work, it's my duty.
There you go. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Well, and we were just talking about responsibility before we started the webinar about having the responsibility to step up. So thank you so much, Werner. And for the additional questions, we need to move on.